Hi again, I'm Dwight Lemke, and we want to talk today about the psychology of negotiation. Because after all, those are people on the other side of the table. We're people, so we should probably figure out what motivates us all. Well, decision research emphasizes that while advising negotiators to be rational is necessary, it's far from sufficient. Why? Because people aren't always rational. Or if they are rational, there are mental habits that we get into, there are biases that we develop. Even the brightest of executives fall victim to four critical systematic errors on a regular basis. We're going to talk about each one of these. The fixed pie bias, the vividness bias, non-rational escalation of commitment, and the susceptibility to framing. We've talked about this fixed pie before. That we get into this idea, well, there's only X number of dollars on the table. That's all we can negotiate over. Don't fall prey to that. What we need to do here, sometimes negotiation is about only the one issue, but that's going to be rare in your negotiating life. And those negotiations are going to be zero-sum in nature, unless you can throw more issues on the table. But most negotiation involves more than one issue, so we've got plenty of room for log rolling and engaging in this idea of positive sum negotiation. If we assume that there's a fixed pie, we're likely to see one, and that's part of our biases. If I look at every negotiation and go, there's only a fixed pie here, you're going to tend to see all negotiations like that, whether that's true or not. The second bias is the vividness bias. That is, vivid information has a greater effect on us than dull but equally valuable information. So, something that was in the headlines last week is going to gain us more currency, or it's going to have more currency with us than something that it was dug out of their annual report by the third assistant secretary. So what we have to be able to do is to sort through information and determine if it's just valuable or vivid. Are we paying attention to this just because, it was on the 6 o'clock news? Are we paying attention to this because it's truly important? One of the ways we can do is create a scoring system, checklist kind of thing. We're going to weight it on its importance, its vivid, its accessibility, its currency, all those kinds of things. And that avoids us falling trapped to that. A non-rational escalation of commitment, which I find an interesting, phrase actually, that as if there's a rational escalation of commitment. Because what happens here is people get involved in competitive arousal. Why do you think people go to auctions? You can get a good deal there sometimes, but most of the time you get caught up in the bidding. It's like that guy sitting at the blackjack table. He's 10 grand down. The house payment is shot. He's about to lose his business. Do you get away up from the table and walk away? Yes, that's truly important. You get up from that table, walk out of that casino, and never come back. Or do you do what most gamblers do? Let's double down and see if we can make it all back. Happens in negotiations. I don't want to walk out of here losing, so I'm willing to throw more and more on the table. That non-rational escalation of commitment. But it's much more likely, to occur if negotiators believe I already have too much invested in this now to walk away. All the decision research shows that sunk costs are a really bad basis for evaluating the way forward. So how do we avoid that? Well, you walk in with a pre-planned exit strategy. I'm going to walk out at this point. You tell yourself that in advance. To use our gambling analogy then. I play blackjack from time to time myself. I walk into the casino. I've got X number of dollars in my hand that I cash into chips. When that's gone, so am I. I've seen too many people pull the credit card out, start zipping it through the machine, and next thing you know, they've lost their job, their house, their kids, their wife. Why? Because they didn't have that plan in advance that they could stick to. You might want to assign yourself a devil's advocate. Take someone on your team who's going to whisper in your ear saying, "Boss, I really think we need to get out of here now," and make them occupy that role honestly. because those escalation forces in the heat of battle are going to be very strong. Next is susceptibility to framing. Even when the expected values are similar, we tend to be risk averse when thinking about potential gains and risk seeking, when we think about potential losses. In fact, there's a whole theory of decision science here called prospect theory, which, won its as progenitors, Nobel Prizes, I recall. In other words, we want the sure thing when we have something to gain, but want all or nothing when we have something to lose. So what happens is that most of us will treat risks involving perceived gains, that is profits, differently from risks perceived with losses. Although from a rational point of view, it shouldn't matter. 10,000 up, 10,000 down should be the same, which means you should have a nice straight line relationship here. But it turns out it comes down like this. It takes a little jog, and that leads to prospect theory. You invest $10, in winning $20 million in the lottery. Well, yeah, because our risk here is small, but the gains are huge. Will you risk $10 million to make $20 million? Ooh, see, that's our problem. It shouldn't matter. So we need to look at this idea of framing, considering the various reference points we use to evaluate the situation and pick the ones that seems most appropriate. We can evaluate whether a strategy still makes sense if we use a different reference point, if we look at it from a different perspective. And we need to be aware that we need to view this from the outside and see if it still makes sense. But the problem is we have conflicting motivations. There's what's called the siren song. Remember when I took a boat trip down the Rhine River? There were these rocks on which the sirens were supposed to perch at night and sing their songs and lure sailors to their deaths. And that's an old myth that goes back to Greek, German, Italian mythology and various sorts, that somewhere along the line we're going to be led astray, but the siren song happens up here. Too often the want self, what I really want, dominates the should self. Should you stay home this weekend and study for your negotiation exam? Or should you go to that really hot party that's going on Sunday afternoon? Which would be more fun? Well, of course, the party. Which is going to give you more payoff in the end? Well, it depends on how you're going to value your grade the next day. And so our want self, that's the childish part of us that wants. All it knows is want. Overwhelms the other part of us that says, well, not really. This is probably not a great idea. Other problems we have are the fact that we're us. Egocentrism. It's hard for any of us to escape that. The tendency for our perceptions or expectations to be biased in our favor. Most people believe that they're above average drivers. Think about that for a moment. You realize that can't possibly be true. We believe we're smarter, better looking, probably taller if we come down to brass tacks, and we know that none of that is true. Yet we still do. This is so common, that it's related to what's called, the fundamental error of attribution. We believe our own successes are because of our skill. We believe that the successes of the folks around us are because they got lucky, and vice versa. We believe that our failures are because of bad luck, where others' failures are because they're just really bad at what they do. All because our ego gets in the way. Which leads us to overconfidence, irrational optimism, and the illusion of superiority. We're much better negotiators than they are across the table here, aren't we? Yeah, absolutely. Keep telling yourself that until they walk away with your shirt. So we get this irrational optimism. Yeah, I can make it. No, you probably can't. That doesn't mean, that you become despondent and go, well, what's the point in trying? Would that a man's grasp should exceed his reach, or what is heaven for? I owe some poet an attribution there. They're going to have to catch it from me later. I mean, we need to have those aspirations, but they also need to be realistic when we're sitting at the negotiation table, because those self-serving attributions are just going to cause us problems. Remember, this also translates on a scale with our team. Our team will engage in what's called in-group versus out-group relations. We, being the in-group, we're smarter, taller, brighter, our teeth are whiter than those other folks there on the other team, and we deserve to win. We're better people than they are. Probably not. But that's the way these things develop. And all this happens for the simple reason that because we're people. The other thing that happens here in negotiations is regret aversion. Because regret is such a painful psychological state, people try to avoid situations that cause it. We can't be like Edith Piaf singing no regrets. I won't attempt it in French because I don't want an apology to Miss Piaf. But research shows that negotiators often contort their decisions to avoid facing any clear evidence that would cause regret. And we tend to feel more regret about acts of commission, things we did, than acts of omission, things we didn't do. So what we do there is we can hold out longer and for more than they reasonably should. There's a point where we should walk away from the table and we haven't. Why? Because we don't want to leave any dollars sitting on that table. We don't want to let go of the opportunity to make, $10 more when we rationally know we should have walked out the window. And the problem is, again, not that we're stupid, not that we're irrational, it's just that we're human. For example, people who are extraordinarily successful or lucky tend to conclude from their experience that they're invulnerable. Well, of course I can do that. I've always been able to do that in the past. Psychological biases problematically affect even highly trained and experienced professionals of all sorts. Such biases can be overcome, but even professionals who are aware of their own biases tend to fall prey to them. The more experience we have, the better off we're going to be, but we can't eliminate that entirely, which means we need to do more of System 2 thinking. System 1 and System 2 thinking come from the decision-making research. Amos Tversky and Dan Kahneman came up with the concept. Kahneman's most recent book, after he got his Nobel Prize, talks about System 2 thinking extensively. System 1 thinking is when we're in a restaurant, we decide that we want the steak. Why? Because we're just in the mood for steak. System 2 thinking comes in when we're about to buy that house, and we sat down. What do we want in the house? How much do we have to spend? What kind of a neighborhood do we have to be? What are the schools like? What's the commute like? We have a decision matrix that we're going to go through and a checklist. We're going to weight things, hopefully. Although the guy who taught me how to do this bought his house because he liked the view out the kitchen window. So, as I said, even people who know better fall prey to these kind of things. But System 2 thinking is this rational kind of process that we go to. System 1 thinking can be roughly equated to intuition or gut feel. So if we're going to make decisions, we need to have a System 2 kind of process, which means we need to have the list. We need to do this rationally. We need to weight things and come up with that kind of an outcome. The second thing we can do here is engage in analogical reading. Analogical reasoning, almost didn't get through that word. Analogical reasoning is reasoning by analogy. What we do is we look at this is like that. And if we use a well-reasoned analogy, it helps to clarify things in our head. I mean, this is like the Schneider negotiation. Okay, now we have a basis for comparison that helps us out, so we can use an example, real-world case study, experience that we've had in the past. Third thing that we can do to avoid the being a victim of our own biases, of our own self-fulfilling prophecies, is to adopt that outsider lens, to look at this negotiation, look at our strategy as if we were standing on the outside looking in. If I was outside my strategy, does it still make sense to me? And that outsider lens, the devil's advocate, sometimes we have to actually bring in an outsider. We bring in a facilitator, we bring in a professional negotiator to say, okay, I'm too close to this. My ego got involved. I need to walk away. You solve this for me. Why? Because we're dealing with emotions here. And emotions are tricky things, ours and theirs. Basically, people's emotions are driven by a set of 5 core interests. That is autonomy, the ability, to be self-actors, appreciation. Am I getting warm fuzzies? Do people appreciate my efforts? Affiliation. We're basically tribal animals. We like to hang in groups. Our role, our role should be important here. And again, status. We ourselves should be important. So, our emotions, when they get involved in negotiations, tend to come from those 5 cores. So, we need to look at these things. Consider identity. So, if we're not considering the identity of the person across the table, their own self-image, we're going to create problems. When emotions do surface, we need to treat them as rational, as legitimate, and acknowledge them as such. Now they need to let the other side, let off steam. Let them blow. What's it going to hurt? On the other hand, we want to control ourselves so we're not blowing at the table. If we experience overwhelming emotion sitting at the table, get up, take a break, walk away. So the idea here is to avoid all of these biases, that clog up our heads, that even as professional negotiators we're going to have a very hard time avoiding. But the more awareness we have of them, the more aware we are of our own motives, the better off we're going to be. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon. Bye-bye.